Welcome to Evangelicalish, where we discuss the good, the bad, and the ugly of the American evangelical church, deconstruction, faith, and God's love through it all. Join us for these episodes live on our Evangelicalish YouTube page on Wednesdays at 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 Central, and 6 o'clock Pacific. Let's journey together.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome into Evangelicalish. I'm Jeremy.
I'm April.
I'm Paul.
And it's so good to see you tonight. We are glad to be with you here, nearing the end of what is now season 2. As the end of the year comes up, we've just decided to do it by year.
Are we like season 15 at one point?
We were at one point we were season
we
like
were on
26.
our way to like season 100.
we were like up there with American Idol and Survivor, and now we've been brought back down to we recounted. Yeah,
the cyber ninjas came in and did an audit, and
that's the cyber ninjas. That's pretty good. So anyway, tonight's going to be really exciting. So I just want to get our housekeeping out of the way really quickly. Don't forget, if you're listening on the podcast, you can always join and be interactive with us. Hop into the comments. You may hear us responding to people. It's not by invitation only. It's for anyone. So you can come and join us on Wednesday nights, 9 Eastern, 6 Pacific. And we would love to have you there on Wednesday nights, primarily on YouTube. And so just search Evangelicalish on YouTube. Give us a follow there. If you're listening to the podcast right now, we would really appreciate it if you'd leave us a 5-star review and let people know why they should be listening, in particularly on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, just because it really helps get these good conversations out to other folks. And we are so thankful for the number of folks that we have downloading, but we want to continue to grow because these conversations matter. And especially with these big time midterms coming up, and our guest tonight's going to have some things to share about that. So, I don't want to get the cart before the horse, but these conversations continue to be relevant. Next week, we will be live-ish. We will be on. Paul will be facilitating a live broadcast of an interview that April and Paul did with Catherine Stewart. She is the author of Power Worshippers: The Dangerous Rise of Religious Nationalism. Really, really incredible conversation. You're not going to want to miss that. So, and then I'm going to be in the comments a little bit. April, I think you said you were going to be in the comments as well. So we're going to be hanging out with y'all and just dialoguing from our own personal YouTube accounts. So that should be a lot of fun. That'll be next week, next Wednesday night. And then last but never least, the Ish community is meeting again on the 22nd. We had a really great time last time on our Ish only Zoom. And so come join April, Paul, myself, and all the other Ish community folks on November 22nd, 9 Eastern, 6 Pacific. That is a Tuesday night, and the reason it's a Tuesday night is because that is the week of Thanksgiving. So we're doing what all the good evangelicals do, and we're doing Wednesday on a Tuesday that week during the week of Thanksgiving. But to be a part of that, you do have to be a part of the Ish community. So go to evangelicalish.com. There's 3 different levels. You've got to be a part of one of the top 2 levels. So you've got to be either beast level or Antichrist level. And I'm like seeing our pictures as I'm going through that, but you got to be on one of those 2 levels. And so you can get the Zoom link and then be a part of that. So anyway, all the good stuff I'm super excited about tonight. I just wanted to get that out of the way as quick as possible, get the housekeeping done so that we can introduce our guests. So I'm going to kick it over to you, Paul.
Well done, Jeremy. And excited to have our guest tonight, somebody that's probably familiar to a lot of our followers and listeners. He is an author, pastor, has a website called empatheticpeople.com, started a blog called Things That Need to Be Said. And I discovered him when he started tweeting at Donald Trump through 2016 through 2020. And John Pavlovitz joins us now on Evangelicalish. And John, glad to have you with us. Excited to talk to you. And how are you feeling as we're about a week away from midterms here?
Oh, wow. I was just talking to a group of people who are discovering drinking. They're contemplating drinking, or they're having problems in advance. I'm feeling a sense of, I tell people it's a sandwich made of hope and dread. And I'm consuming that, and it's difficult to figure out. I've got some optimism. It's guarded, but it's also optimism that understands that the reality is going to be the reality on November 9th or 10th or 20th, whenever we get the results. And we're going to have to do the work of being decent human beings. So no matter what happens, we're just going to prepare and then keep working.
How did you get here? How did you get to be this, from being a youth minister, I know you did in the past and stuff, to being this sort of burr in the saddle of Donald Trump and a guy, really being a voice to challenge Christian nationalism as it's come up in our country?
Well, ministry at all was a surprise to me. I was working as an art director and found myself volunteering for a church. And at the time I was what I would call a hopeful agnostic, and ended up loving working with young people. And as I started to teach them about a faith that I didn't really have, my faith started to grow. Ended up in ministry, leaving my secular career about 7 years later and entering the world of full-time ministry. And there's a long story there, but what started to happen was I started to feel the tension as the churches got larger and my profile got larger, tension between the person I felt I was called to be as I followed Jesus and the pastor I was expected to be. And that tension started to increase about 2015 when the campaign was starting, and I started to see what was happening in the church and felt a growing responsibility to speak with specificity into that. And so that really led me to where I am, slowly but surely, to ministry termination, I say. And then
you were invited to not minister anymore, huh?
That's right. I tell people, I heard God calling me to leave in the form of my pastor's voice saying, "You're fired." And then I got this virtual community. I was through some blog posts that went viral, found myself with this, growing platform. And I just did what I always had done, which was to pastor people, to care for people, and to speak on the issues that mattered. And being fired actually freed me to speak with clarity. And with that clarity came a group of people who use the writings as a hub. And so that's how I've kind of found myself here. It's quite a surprise to me, for sure.
I was going to ask earlier, did you find yourself, you say you're, kind of cautiously optimistic as we enter into the election season. I'm curious, did you find yourself being more just like openly optimistic, maybe in the last two presidential elections, and with the results of those? Because I even think about the 2020 election, it is a shock that many millions of people even voted for the incumbent president. But does that kind of give you some pause that some of that rhetoric and some of that nationalism is obviously seeped in and here to stay?
It has. What I try to remember, Jeremy, is that in 2015, I would have seen the white evangelical conservative movement, the politically aligned movement, as a dying dinosaur. And it was something that was losing traction. And what I think 2016 did was it gave it power and a platform that it hadn't had. And I think they have made the most of that and grabbed all the power that they could. But if I take that out of it, that story is hard to get out of your head, and seeing so many people align with it, of course, is heartbreaking. But there is just such a huge community. I tell people all the time, the growth of my blog and my platform, I've been fortunate to have 100 million people read this blog, but it doesn't say anything about my writing as much as it is confirmation of how many people are asking the questions we're asking, are frustrated by what we're frustrated by, and are grieving what we're grieving. And so I always remind myself that vast congregation is out there, and it's really about how do we collectively move in response. And that's been the difficult part.
I think that kind of speaks to all of our platforms. I mean, I think that's what we've all found in building the platforms that we have. Hundreds of thousands of folks who are seeking something different, seeking Jesus or the ideals and teachings of Jesus outside of the traditional church. But I'll finish with this question. I'll toss it over to April and Paul. But I just want to. I'm curious. You said that you felt like that nationalism was kind of this Christian nationalism, this old school way of thinking was kind of a dinosaur that was dying. I kind of want to ask about that. Do you think that it was a dying fire that caught fresh air, or do you think that it was there as strong as ever and it just found a platform?
Well, I think, Trump didn't create any of the stuff that we're seeing now. He just revealed it, and we know that. Mm-hmm. So I think what I think it's emboldened people, this movement has emboldened people to cultivate the worst of themselves. So they might have had this racism that has run through their lives, or this deeply rooted fear of immigrants or outsiders or Muslims, and the power of that movement, it gave people permission to embrace that and to speak it. And so that's just, it's made it seem like out of nowhere, oh, I didn't realize my aunt was so horrible, or I didn't realize many of my neighbors, have this fearful, because that's what religion and politics at their worst do, right? They leverage fear, prejudice, stereotype. And so you get a bunch of people and you terrify them. Well, that's the story here. It's a group of people who have an adversarial faith, a faith that can't exist, and a politics that can't exist without an encroaching enemy. So it's tapped into the worst fears that people have, and no one is at their best when they're terrified.
Yeah. I just want to tell you too, I'm pretty sure you were the first pastor that I saw speak out against Trump in 2015 leading up to 2016. And I remember reading, it was one of your blogs, and feeling just so relieved that I wasn't crazy. Yeah. Because I was being gaslit by everyone around me. And I had this tug on side, no, there's something wrong with Trump. I don't understand what's going on. And then to see a pastor publicly take such a strong stance and get a lot of hate for it was so just vindicating and validating for me. And I'm sure for, millions of others as well. So I hope that the impact, the positive impact, and maybe negative for the conservatives out there, but the positive impact you've had for so many of us.
Well, thank you, April. Well, the funny thing was, as I started down this road, I always need to remind people, especially those who say, oh, he's just some sort of Dem operative. I'd written the blog for years before 2015 and never mentioned politics, never mentioned a political party or a politician by name. It was only as the campaign started in seeing exactly actually one of the most pivotal moments for me was the Sandy Hook shooting, even that long ago, in that I saw James Dobson and I saw Mike Huckabee using that moment to sort of say, this happened because we've kicked God out of schools. And I wrote a piece that day that was really a visceral response. And I wasn't thinking about how I was going to keep my job, or if this was going to upset the people in my congregation. I just released those words, and then the audience started to grow. They found the writing, and that's when I realized, okay, I can't talk in generalities anymore. I need to speak clearly, and Trump was just the prime example of that. I couldn't just talk about politics in general, because this was a very specific threat, historically speaking. And but I'm grateful. And I remember writing the first time I mentioned Trump, and a family member came and said, this is probably not good, because you're going to immediately alienate half your audience. And I said, well, I would rather have 100% of people who want to have an authentic conversation about humanity than keep everybody pleased. And so that was a choice that I had to make.
Yeah.
And I always thought we were basically good in all of this, but seeing, for me, it was weapons of mass destruction really started churning things in my head. And then, that Christian president and his Christian secretary of state and Christian vice president made up a reason for us to go bomb some people. And then the way we treated President Obama, I'm like, okay, we're not so good, are we? So I think that's been coming along. But then still, I mean, could you believe, we just kept saying, oh, that's it. Now Trump's gone too far. Christians will never go. It was just so stunning. Were you stunned that it got to this point through all of that?
It's the ever deepening, ever lowering bottom that I think was continually a source of grief for me. And that's the story here for so many people who are moderate or to the left. I think it's this accumulated grief over people we thought we knew, and our idea of family and our idea of country and church. And I can remember that, we used to have men's breakfasts at the megachurch where I was on staff, and they used to, every Saturday, they would write letters to the president at the time, and then everyone would pass them around and sign them. But when Obama was elected, they suddenly stopped doing that at our church. And I thought, well, okay, that's interesting. And so that just, it was the beginning of that slippery slope to the place where we are now.
I remember reading then Senator Obama's first book, and I was in college, and I remember reading, and even then being at a very conservative Baptist college, going through ministry, getting a ministry degree, doing all of those things. I remember reading his, what we would call, I remember reading his testimony, in that book, and I remember reading that and going, it checks all the boxes. It's legit. Like this guy loves Jesus, and this guy loves people. Like, and so then all of a sudden it was like he was demonized, and he's this, somebody from another country, he doesn't have a birth certificate, is secretly working for Osama bin Laden, like all this insanity. And it just made no sense. And I think that for me as well was that point when I saw the whole thing really start to make a hard shift in like this strong line. And I honestly don't think, I've said this a couple of times, I don't think that I don't think we would have seen the same outcry from a politician with the exact same platform as Obama if Obama had been white. I think what sparked that was the fact that he was a man of color, and it brought out all that internalized misogyny and racism, and then everybody ran rampant inside of the evangelical circle.
No doubt. And I always say, people would say to me, well, this is all Obama's fault. And I say, yeah, it really is. He had the nerve to be black. And I mean, that's where you see the embedded, racism in the church. And my wife at the time worked for Billy Graham, and because Billy Graham was, located not far from the church where I was serving. So I used to get invited to speak there to their employees for their devotions all the time. And so what you started to see as Billy became more and more ill and unable to, participate in the organization, and Franklin began to assume more control. And you started to see things like Greta Van Susteren show up, or Sarah Palin on site. And you started to realize, okay, there is a shift happening here. And there are a group of Christians waiting for consent to embrace the racism that they've hidden for the sake of decorum. And that's it finally was acceptable. And then what it's led to is them embracing someone who is the antithesis of the teachings and life of Jesus, of course, right? And so that's upside down. That's where we are.
The pendulum swings so hard, like it swung so hard.
Oh, so I have a question. Has there been anything specifically that surprised you, which I guess we've all been surprised, but was there something that surprised you the most in how, I don't know, like if certain people reacted to you speaking out against Trump, or the hatred that you received? Like, were you expecting that, or did it throw you off?
Well, I was expecting it, but what I was always struck by was, let's say the week before I started writing about Trump, people in my church celebrated my boldness. and celebrated how opinionated I was on so many issues. But once my boldness argued with their philosophy or their politics, or it sort of rattled their privilege, then all of a sudden that boldness was a liability. And so I saw how quickly, I always say organized religion and organized crime are very similar, because when you're in the family, you're like fiercely loved. But the moment you stray, it's like horse heads in the bed, right? And that's where I found, hundreds of people from my church cast me aside when they really celebrated that part of me that was deeply committed to the teachings of Jesus. And suddenly that was not something they celebrated.
It's so crazy to think about now. I mean, we can see it so clearly now, but I remember the first time somebody in my church posted something on Facebook about chemtrails, and he was saying that President Obama was poisoning us through chemtrails. And so I went to him and said, "What are you talking about?" And it was the first time I really saw that conspiracy theory line running through Christianity. And from then I just started seeing it again and again and again. And like, I don't know, how did we get here? Do you think is it some of the end times teaching that sort of taught us to think this way and think conspiratorially, or what is it about sort of American evangelicalism that put us in position to fall for this stuff, you think? Or is there?
Well, I think we all have a story that we tell ourselves, and we need that story to be true. We find that we are defined by that story. And for so many people, if they're raised for decades with an angry God, or believing that to love God they need to hate a certain group of people, that was my story growing up. I had this God who I knew loved me fiercely, but I was also deathly afraid of that God, because I didn't really want to do the wrong thing or say the wrong thing and piss off that God. And again, once you manipulate people into being fearful, you can get them to do just about anything. And you combine that with that fierce love for community that I mentioned. So many people that we are thinking about and talking about, they're terrified of being ostracized out of their community and pushed to the periphery. It just so happens that most of us have taken that risk and realized that there's life outside of it. But that community is such a powerful tool of manipulation. And I think that's a lot of the story.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
Paul. I was going to ask, have you found anyone that was deeply conservative prior to maybe reading your blog or talking to you? Like, have you seen anyone change their mind because of things that you've said, or found anything that would work? Because I feel like a lot of people are so deeply indoctrinated at this point that some of us don't know what to do. So have you had success?
I haven't. No, I
was like, what?
Okay.
That's all the time we have. No, I have. I've seen it, and what I notice is now, having done this for enough, probably the last 7 or 8 years in this public way, I now have people contacting me all the time, and they say, "I encountered your writing back at this point, and I was not ready, because I wasn't ready to engage the questions you were asking. I was still in defense posture against people like you. And over time, I've come to see the commonalities, and I've actually embraced what you're talking about, and I've made this complete pivot." Or I see people who are in the middle of that. I think part of the story here is we want to meet people who have been raised for decades in this toxic Christianity, and we want to suddenly see them change before our eyes and realize, have this moment where the scales fall from their eyes. And that doesn't always happen. But I think there are so many people in the process of changing. And one of the most terrifying things when you're going through, whether you call it deconstruction, I call it demolition, that when you go through that, you're terrified of the uncertainty, because you're taught that certainty is the moral virtue. And so people are changing all the time. Most of them, they can't admit to the degree that they are wrestling. They can't admit to the existential crisis, but it's there. So I see success all the time. I think people individually are beautiful. It's what collectively they become problematic. And that's kind of
it's like my son. He's 7. And he becomes extremely defensive when he knows the things he's saying doesn't add up, right? Like he knows the story he's giving. He's trying everything he can to make it fit and to make me buy something from him, but he knows it's not working. And so then he just gets brutally defensive and loud. And I feel like I'm getting the same, like, early childhood toddler vibes from the American evangelical church, because they know once the first thread goes, once the first crack in the dam happens, it's going to be a flood. And
wait, do you think so? Like, I think they believe this shit. I mean, I think most of the people I encounter, they truly believe that God wants them to vote for Donald Trump and Joe Biden is going to end up in prison.
I think in their heart of hearts, I think they have a tough time putting their head on the pillow behind closed doors, knowing, these are the things that are like,
they're good at hiding it.
It's cognitive dissonance. I think
they
it's a
are
mixture.
Good at hiding it.
Yeah, it's people. I do think that a lot of people do have good hearts and believe that they're doing the right thing, but when pressed, they either dig their heels in deeper or they tuck it away and don't think about it, which was what I did for a long time before I finally allowed myself to actually.
But why did you tuck it away?
Because I didn't have an answer for it and it was uncomfortable.
So I think that's what I'm saying is
but it's cognitive dissonance. It's kind of like, I don't need to think about that. God works in mysterious ways. Like there's way you can say things to write things off in Christianese.
Yeah.
That like, okay, I'll wrap this up and put it here and it makes sense for now and I'll never touch it again.
But they do that intentionally.
Like the Bible talking about being hard-hearted and the more times you like push away truth, you become more ensconced in defending your community narrative. And I think you said it well, John. It's when you don't want to get excommunicated from the community, you will adopt that cognitive dissonance to be able to survive in the community.
Right. And I think when you try to figure out the motivations behind people, whether they are being manipulated or whether they know better and they're simply in denial, the net result is the same. And actually they're then placed into the same community. They're part of this movement away from diversity and justice and compassionate expression of faith. And so I don't even really I can't figure out someone's motivation. I can only see the results of what they support. And so that's where sometimes I can't even entertain it because they can't admit it. So how can I figure it out? Mm-hmm. I just have to fight the visible, signs, the visible manifestations of their beliefs.
Right, because intent does not negate impact.
That's correct.
I mean, I've realized with some people, like I thought we could have a logical conversation, but we are truly living in two different worlds. The sky is blue in my world, and the sky is chartreuse in their world, and it's impossible to have legit discussion. And by the way, you're a nice guy, John, which is always good when you meet somebody. You always wonder how they'll be, but I have people all the time be like, Paul, why don't you say bad things about the Muslims too? Or why are you always, do you get that a lot from people? Like, why aren't you more fair or you're too harsh or too mean or those types of things?
All the time. The way I deal with it is, as a part of it is that I tell people I'm harder on those who I considered family. I came from this place. This is my tradition. I'm a white cisgender heterosexual man who was raised in the church. So I want to speak to that group of people because I understand them and because I know that many of them know better. And I know the standard that they say they live up to. I know the gospel stories. So yeah, I am going to be harder on them because that is the home of my tradition. That's my geography of my faith. But the other part is just reminding them that Jesus was not gentle. He was the good shepherd, which means he was compassionate caregiver to those he saw as the harassed and helpless sheep. But to those he saw as the wolves, he was the fierce opposition. And so it's okay. We can be forceful and hard on people and direct and still be loving. And that's what the hope is.
And he would never say, here's what's wrong with my people. And to be fair, here's what's wrong with the Samaritans and the Romans too. I mean, he was speaking to his own community. Yeah.
That's right. You have heard it said, but I tell you, and it's that constant, and back to what we were talking about, April, I think you mentioned it. For me, asking the questions has been the most threatening thing that I've ever written. So I don't have to write that an evangelical Trump supporter is this or this or this. I have to simply ask the question, do you think this is compatible with the Sermon on the Mount? And that's all you need to do is ask that question. And once you do, or do you think the reality of hell is compatible with a God who is love? You ask that question, and then you let that question mess with people, and that's where the fierce pushback comes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I think they know inside of them that, you know, the questions is where it starts to degrade, right? Like
they hate questions.
Apart.
Like, I mean, I remember being told not to ask questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Don't ask too many questions.
Yeah.
Because one day you'll wake up an atheist and go to hell.
I remember.
Well, I'm not going to ask any questions. Then.
I remember being told, "Don't question the man of God." You know, like anything the pastor says.
Don't touch God's anointed.
Yeah. Anything the pastor says, like, you know, you take it 110% truth and walk with it and you live in it, you know, and
right.
It's just so dangerous. It's cult behavior. Like it's control, it's manipulation, it's cult behavior to tell people you cannot ask questions. And what I find interesting is, so I was reading an article the other day that talked about the number of times Jesus asked questions versus the number of times he directly answered them. And how many times he answered questions with a question. And so what you're saying, John, is so interesting. And it's the exact same approach that Jesus used. It wasn't like you're being a Christian nationalist racist. It's, you know, do you think that these things that you're doing here match up to the heart of Jesus displayed there? And it automatically draws those things out. But, you know, Jesus asked, I forget what it was, 307 questions, I think, through the context of the four Gospels. He only directly answered 3. And, you know, one of those was about if he wanted, you know, water at one point while being crucified. And so...
He did call them whitewashed tombs, though, and tell them that their dad was the devil. So
Matthew chapter 23 is always very comforting to me because it's a whole chapter about Jesus getting some things off his chest.
Yeah.
But even then, I see that Jesus is not fueled in that he's not fueled by the desire to damage people. He's fueled by the compassion he has for people who are being damaged, for the people who are being oppressed. And so I think that's part of the story, is that if empathy fuels what we do, it can still be redemptive, even if the hearer is uncomfortable. But you're right. And you ask those questions and then you invite people's faith. I think the story that we all understand is partly to blame is that many people have a faith that is not been tested. It's not been questioned. They have a shorthand faith that's been fed to them by their pastors. They know what they're supposed to say to this social issue and this social issue. And it's when you ask the question, all of a sudden, yet they have to be challenged. I'll give you an example. I read about being at a dog park with my dog and talking to this couple who were going to the local Southern Baptist seminary. And she just brought up hell out of the clear blue, as you do. And she said, you know, God loved me and I deserved hell. And I said, something about hearing it in that context, I just decided to push back. And I said, so you think you deserve hell just for existing? And I said, what do you think that says about God? And she said, well, what? I mean, he loves me. And I said, well, yeah, but you think you're depraved simply for being born. And I said, I don't know, understand that. And that's part of it. Once she started to even wrestle with that response that she always automatically had, then you realize she hadn't asked those questions. She hadn't simply stepped back from her story and said, does this story make sense with a character of a God who is love? So I think that's part of the fear that everyone has of engaging that.
I think maybe I still haven't worked through all my anger issues with the church yet, so I'm still working on it. But I love, I think it's Luke 11 when the lawyers come to Jesus and say, hey, you know, Jesus has been like ripping the religious leaders right and left. And then the lawyers come and they're like, Jesus, when you insult them, people think you're insulting us too. And he's like, oh yeah, let me tell you what I think of you guys. And then the next 5 verses, he just lays into the lawyers.
Or my wine that some people think is grape juice. Right.
Hold my grape juice, my unfermented grape juice. No, but I agree. I agree with you, Paul. I'm not discrediting the directness of Jesus whatsoever. I think he said some very hard things intentionally, and had his harshest words for like John was saying earlier, the ones who were misleading and misguiding the most vulnerable. And so I absolutely 100% agree with that. I just think it is interesting how many people Jesus pissed off by asking questions. And I'm sure they thought that it was arrogant or, him trying to prove some kind of point, when really he's like legitimately posing a question that they have to wrestle with and answer. And it's just because they don't like the answer and they know the answer is not good.
Yeah, Jeremy, I talked about it in my first book. I talked about it that life began to argue with my theology, and I had a choice. Was I going to lean into the stories that were conflicting with my story, with my faith story, or was I going to just go back to my faith story no matter what, even though life was presenting me oppositional ideas? And I think that's what we do. We have this self-preservation instinct that kicks in. We don't want to deal with the fact that, for me, it was the scriptures about sexuality. I thought I'd take these 6 or 7 clobber verses and investigate them because I didn't feel like there was truth to some things that I grew up believing that those verses were supposed to be saying. The problem was when I got through, deconstructing those verses, I realized that they didn't mean what I grew up thinking or being taught that they meant. But now I had to investigate the sentences around them and the books they were a part of. And then you look and all of a sudden you're dismantling everything. And that's terrifying. So that's something most people don't want to bother having to deal with.
No, I mean, no one wants to wake up one day and... Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, April.
I was just going to say, no one wants to wake up...
We should jump into a mid-roll and then let's jump into a mid-roll and then we'll see what John sees coming up as we hit the midterms here, what's coming ahead, and what does church look like going forward in all this. So we'll do that as we continue here on Evangelicalish.
Follow us to catch all the latest content and encouragement. You can check us out on TikTok by following @Evangelicalish or subscribe on YouTube by searching Evangelicalish. That's evangelical with an ISH. And don't forget to catch our live streams each and every single Wednesday night on YouTube at 9 Eastern, 8 Central, and 6 Pacific. And now back to the Evangelicalish podcast.
All right, April, jump back in now that I rudely interrupted you.
I don't remember what I was saying.
You would hate to wake up one day and ...
Oh, no one wakes up one day is like, I think I'm going to question everything I've ever believed. That sounds fun.
Right. No, it's this slow burn, right? Like and I think that's why I loved that quote earlier, and Michelle called it out in the chat. Life began to argue with my theology, and I think that's very much my story as well, and probably all of our stories to an extent of we built these relationships and we began to see people interacting in positive or negative ways and build positive and negative relationships that really just did not settle well with the things that we had been indoctrinated with. And so I think there's something really beautiful about that. But you're right, April. I don't think anybody wakes up one day and goes, you know what, I'm going to put it all on the cutting room floor and just start from scratch.
Yeah, no one chooses to deconstruct. Deconstruction chooses you.
Deconstruction chooses you.
It's like we've got this pandemic and my kids are not listening to me and I don't know how I'm going to pay for the mortgage. And let me also have an existential crisis that's going to dismantle everything I've ever believed, right? It's like, but that's the problem. We know that once you go through that, or at least part of this process is you come out to the other side of it, or you come through something and you see how expansive a life there is outside of a fearful faith. And you want that for people. And that's part of I'm always wrestling with and for my faith tradition simultaneously, because I've seen the beautiful parts of it, but I also see the damage it's doing. And you want people to experience what life is like when you ask those questions, because it's a beautiful thing to engage them.
I'm on your email list, John, and I think is it the Damn Givers newsletter? Is that right?
Yes.
So you're asking people to give a damn, and you've been talking a lot about this vote coming up. What do you see as the importance of the voting that we're going to do here in the next week or so?
I think there's no way to overstate how critical it is for so much of our human rights and the way that our democracy works. But the only thing that we can do is wake up to the reality of the results of the vote. As we talked a little bit earlier, and we talked before we got online. the dam givers, the people who care deeply about the world, we're going to have to get up and do the work of being human no matter what happens. And whatever story that we're telling ourselves when we wake up and get the results, we're going to have to some degree put that to the side. And people say to me all the time, well, what do we do if we lose? Where's the hope? And I just asked them where the hope is right now for them, because it's going to be in the same place. It's going to be in the things that you care deeply about and the burdens that you carry and in the community that you're a part of. And those things are going to still be true. And we're probably going to be needed more than ever, even if we get a favorable political result. Because the story for me now is not theology or politics. It's the relational fractures that these things have caused. It's the way they trickle down to our families and friendships and social circles. And that's where the work's going to have to be done no matter what, because the results are going to mean a group of people are celebrating, another group of people are grieving. So it's not going to get better no matter what for that relational fracture.
Mm-hmm. It does seem like, and maybe the pandemic was part of the reason too, because there's so many conspiracies going on and people, all they had was time to be home and watch Fox News and Newsmax. But it does seem that the extreme right is not that they're getting more extreme. I think they've always been extreme, but that they're becoming more mainstream. And like your average grandparents out there that used to just be kind and give you $20 for your birthday are now, talking about civil war. I'm like, what are you doing over there?
Well, you're right. And I think a couple of things are going on. One of them is, as people are pulling away from organized religion because of the things we've been talking about, they're not leaving conservative churches and going necessarily to progressive faith communities. They're just leaving altogether. And so what you see is this sort of centralizing of this conservative extremist religion, and it's gaining traction because so many of us are now outside the churches and we're not in buildings for an hour on Sunday. And that's the hard part, is how do you mobilize a group of people who are so disparate? And even though that's the beauty of it, I think progressive people of faith or moderate people, or even people who don't have a religious tradition, they don't want authoritarianism. People ask me all the time, where are the Franklin Grahams on the left? And I said, well, we don't want them. We don't want central figures to hold power. That's the whole point. But it also hinders our ability to have a national visible presence.
Mm-hmm. It does seem that on the right specifically, you have to check all of the boxes. There's not a lot of room for free thought. So everyone's almost this cookie cutter version of everybody else. And on the left, it does seem that there's a lot more different, mostly the same, but different ideologies on different things. Like there's just more variety of thought.
Right. And by nature, a progressive or a more liberal theology is based on the idea that we can tolerate a bit of difference, that we can sit with people's stories, and that we have a posture of curiosity toward them. And that tends to make us more passive. And because when you have that fearful religion, you can leverage that. I have a pastor who told me, I miss hell, John. I miss the idea of hell, because when I had hell, I could manipulate people. I could get them to vote a certain way. I could get them to give. I could get them to participate. But when I lost hell, I lost leverage. And I had to figure out, how can I create urgency in people? And I think when you think about progressive faith, that's where we need to ratchet up the urgency. The urgency are human beings who are imperiled right now. And so that's the challenge.
It's like the right wing people who say, well, are you happy about your guy Biden? And I'm like, Biden is not my guy. I would not have voted for Joe Biden if he wasn't running against Donald Trump. I can tell you that for a fact. And part of the issue of that is, like, my daughter will probably vote, but she's so dissatisfied with what the Democrats have done as a very extremely liberal progressive. She's, I think some of those folks who voted against Donald Trump for Joe Biden may not come out in the midterms. And it's hard in a midterm to say, hey, these people being elected at the state level and other things are going to be real problems that want to keep Republicans in power. And so sometimes we're going to have to hold our nose and vote right now.
Well, I think there's a fatigue that decent people are feeling because we've been, if you're engaged in politics or you're engaged in the church, then you see what's happening, and there's an accumulated, like I said, grieving, but also the collateral damage of that is that everyone's exhausted, and that by design the right has created crisis after crisis, and they know that people can't, they don't have the bandwidth to respond to all of it. And I think most of us thought if we could get to 2020 and we had a favorable election result there, then we could all take an exhale and at least have some kind of normalcy. And when that didn't happen, when we had even the opposite, it's trying to sustain that level of urgency. And that's why so many people are checking out, because you combine that with a pandemic and people simply don't have the resources to keep up. And that's what we're dealing with.
Well, it's really, exhausting to try to convince an entire group of people that people matter and that you are harming people. And when you try to convince people, and you can have all the stats and you can have human beings standing in front of them and saying, hey, you are hurting me, an individual. And they say, you're just woke. It's like, I don't even know how to have a conversation.
That's right. Yeah. When someone says woke as a pejorative term, I know that they are not able to think critically about complex issues, and that's really that laziness. You can fall back into platitudes and whatever the pastor is telling you or whatever a politician gives you. That's why these America First is not an accident, that there are these sound bites that people just can embrace and don't have to question, and they can feel righteous or feel morally sound, and they haven't really done any work. Yeah.
I would say, Lisa says in the comments, I think Joe's accomplished a lot. I think he's accomplished as much as he possibly could with, as much discourse as there is in the world today. But I will say, I think that just the idea of decency being something that's happening inside of not just the executive branch, but, the cabinet and everything surrounding it, I think matters. And so it'll be interesting to kind of see how things play out. Obviously not just in a couple of weeks or in a week rather, but also to see how things kind of play out in the 2 years leading up to the next major presidential election, because I think that is going to really tell us a lot about where we are, as we kind of continue down this road. I want to pose this question, and this is just for everybody in general. Like, do you see a day in our lifetimes when the United States doesn't look like what it is now?
Like divided, where it's not divided?
Like do we think that maybe, and I'm not putting war on anything. I'm just saying, like, do we believe that maybe states or areas or territories will decide to step away from the United States just because maybe the chasm has gotten too deep?
Well,
empires end.
That's right. All empires fall. And I was just talking to a group of people, and the idea of if a minority gains power and begins to control the majority, there will be a tipping point. There will be some sort of response, and we can't even fathom what that is. And no one wants any sort of violence or mass societal upheaval. But I think we're going to see, as history has shown, that all empires fall, and that's part of what needs to happen. But I also will say, in 2015, I couldn't have conceived that a person like Donald Trump would have been embraced by evangelicals and elected. And then I wouldn't have.
Or Herschel Walker.
So many things that have happened since then. So Jesus. I try not to even try and imagine, because I try to keep many people in the now. It's because there are things we have to respond to in real time. And, it's almost impossible for our brains to hold what America could look like. So we better figure out, well, we have a week. What can we do in a week?
Yeah, I think that's true. But, and we've mentioned it before, you look historically, all major empires last about 250 years, give or take, or all world superpowers. And, that's kind of,
hey, you know what? The world's not going to last 250 years with climate change. So cheers to that.
That's right. It's a race to the worst possible ending.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
This is a happy show.
yeah, that's right.
I think Jeremy, like you were talking about, I think kindness matters or something like that. But I mean, the thing is, if you look at the Paul Pelosi situation going on right now, like being the biggest asshole you can be is now a character, is a desired character trait in the right wing. And I we always want to be hesitant to compare things to Hitler, but that cruelty and violence as political discourse is what dehumanized a group of people to do horrible things. And it's not dissimilar. And I don't want to say it's Hitler, but it's not dissimilar that kindness is now being looked down upon, and violence as a legitimate discourse, as the Republican Party said, is becoming more of a norm. And it didn't take any time at all for them to come out and start saying this really horrific stuff about Paul Pelosi being nearly killed with a hammer. And so character
making it Halloween
kindness,
costumes out of it.
being an idiot and a horrible person is now a virtue on the right. And so I don't know how a country survives that, to be honest.
Well, and that's where, Paul, you hope that the people that we're talking about who are posting that and saying that there's a massive group of people in the middle, many who vote Republican, who are horrified by that, and they may be silent for a lot of the reasons we talked about earlier. My hope is that when they go to vote, they can actually say, what do my faith convictions tell me I should be doing right now? And will I abide that kind of situation that you're talking about with Paul Pelosi? I'm hoping that enough people will say, okay, this is all too far. I even have some conservative friends who watched Tucker Carlson, and they were saying, a few months ago, well, they'll never overturn Roe v. Wade because that would be disastrous. And they even have been shocked. So I do see, we're looking at social media, which is such a, small percentage of people. And then we're looking at the extremists of that group. And it's really easy to let them tell the story for us. And that may not be accurate. It just may be the one that we're seeing.
I think a lot of people live kind of under a rock too. Like there's not most modern day conservatives that vote probably aren't super involved in politics and even may not even be aware at how extreme the parties come. Like I've had conversations with people that vote Republican just because they've always voted straight R, because that's what good Christians do, especially in the South. And when pressed and like telling them like anything that's gone on in the last 2 years, they were shocked at some of the things that I told them. Like they just didn't know. So, as long as we are able to get some more awareness out there, and because I do think there are people out there with good hearts that vote Republican that really just don't know what they're doing or what it's causing to the country.
Yeah, some of that's by design or by choice, and some of it has simply happened. If your primary source of news is Fox News or Newsmax,
Right.
Your filter is giving you a false reality, and basically you're not even seeing the things that keep us up at night. They're sleeping and they're fine. They just don't realize that they're in danger as well. Their freedoms and their liberties are in just as much jeopardy as ours as progressives, and that's
and I think what's happened is that I would say a majority of the country probably fits somewhere towards the middle. Whether you be liberal socially or conservative fiscally or vice versa, whatever the case is, I think a lot of the country fits in the middle. The problem is that it's why we love the NFL. It's why the Romans loved the Colosseum, right? We love bloodshed. We love competition. We love, we love drama, right? All of those things. And so while most of the United States, I think, fits somewhere kind of in the middle-ish, the voices that we are hearing are the most extreme, and we like that. There's part of us that likes that pitting of, these extreme voices against one another and trying to swell that to some kind of, overarching problematic war.
We need more parties. We need more political
voting.
We need ranked choice voting. We need some things to break down this two-party system for sure. So, John, I'm sure you get no small amount of hate mail and people who disagree with you and do it in very loud, ugly terms. We like to do a segment on this show every once in a while we call Hate Comments of the Week. And so do you have any good hate comments to share with us from your past or recent past?
Well, how many hours do we have here, Paul? But okay, I'll give you a couple that just bounced off the page today. This one says, John Pavlovitz is scum of the scum piece of garbage. By the way, I'm not correcting the grammar on these. John Pavlovitz is scum of the scum piece of garbage. You liberal idiot. If I saw one of your books in front of me, I would grab a lighter and light the book on fire. I would lose brain cells if I read one chapter of your book, you brainless moron. That's from Danny.
Cool.
So I'm sending Danny a copy of my book. And
nice.
There's one other one that if I can find it, it will be enjoyable here. That was really a special one. Okay, here we go. John, I just read your blog. I never heard of you. It was sent to me by a libtard friend. In short, I think it is you and your ilk that are dangerous. You are as full of shit as a Christmas turkey. That's from Mac in Arkansas, and I'm just really hoping Mac doesn't invite me over for Christmas.
What kind of turkeys is he eating?
I love it.
Show in hell are you watching? So that's just
sometimes you do appreciate the creativity, though, right?
Yeah, I mean, the imagery is profoundly moving. It's
Wow.
Yeah. So,
Jeremy, do you have a hate comment this week?
I do. I'm still trying to find it. So if somebody else has theirs pulled up, I lost it.
You ready, April?
Oh, I can do mine. Yeah. My favorite creative one, I think I said last week, where someone said I should be named April a Pain because I'm not a joy at all. But here's one. And I also am not correcting any of the spelling or grammar. So here's one. Lady, get a life. Only Andimma-rats would think like you. That's one. And then here's another one that's quick reminder, folks. She a demon in nature, human form.
Oh, I was called a demon this week as well. It's always surprising.
Yeah. So fellow demon. Someone asked me on TikTok recently, what's it like to be a demon? And I think I want to make a video and be like, it's almost exactly like being a human, except idiots call you a demon.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, I have one from Marvin. It's one of my favorites of all time. He says, you are a liberal false Christian funded by George Soros, which makes me say, when do I get that check? When does that check come in?
Still waiting on mine.
I'm waiting on that. Yeah, funded by George Soros. Do you ever actually read the Bible? I think the only books you read are the ones you hold up for in schools that are teaching the kids about licking buttholes.
Oh.
And Marvin made about 10 comments on my page about books telling kids how to lick buttholes. Are there books teaching our kids in schools about licking buttholes? Something about
very odd. Well, I don't know what books he's reading, but I've never heard of them.
Yeah, I didn't go to the book fair and see what you can find, I guess.
That reads a lot like projection.
Yes, it does.
It's got some repression going on there.
I mean, it is though. You think like somebody on Fox News said, "Do you know what this book is about? It's teaching kids about licking buttholes," and then they all go out and say, "Do you know what they're teaching kids in school?"
Oh my gosh! Everyone around here, my neighbor came up and warned me that drug dealers were sneaking drugs in Skittles because they figured out how to open it and close it back up for trick-or-treaters. Fox News is just scaring everybody with fentanyl.
Do you know what's funny? They were saying like drug dealers were going to be handing out fentanyl to kids because they look like candy. And I'm like, that's nuts. What drug dealer is going to do that? Then I went on the CDC government website and they were warning about this, like the federal government was giving warnings about
zero trick-or-treaters received drugs in their candy. But you know what my kids received? Each of them received a gospel tract trick-or-treating.
A lot of fiber in that.
So I had a video on TikTok that resurfaced. Occasionally you'll have one pop back up and start like hitting the FYP again. It was the one where I was talking about resigning from my last church. And this guy says, sounds like the church made the right action with you, brother. He says, he goes on to say,
Brother.
Yeah. Sounds like the church took the right action for you, brother. He says, win stupid game or play stupid games, win stupid prizes. I hope you and your liberal self will find God before Satan finds you in hell.
Oh.
In love.
But we're
It's
brothers.
the flames
so
for you, brother.
It's the flames for you, brother.
I hate that. I think that annoys me the most is when they're like, the other day, someone was like, "You are a complete abomination. You are destroying the faith." God bless you. Like, okay.
You're
God
going
bless
to
you
hell.
and your family.
It's like they say with so much joy that we're going to hell, but they're praying for me. So I don't know which one they want. Do they want me to not go to hell, or
They love hell. Oh, they love hell, and they love
every
condemning people
disagreement with a Christian ends with a violent threat. Well,
Yeah, I
God's
say, well,
going to show you one day.
I always ask, in this hell, will you be there? And they say no, and I say, well, I'll take my chances.
there.
That's pretty good.
If heaven
Yeah,
is
spending
hanging out with
eternity
you.
in heaven with them is not the flex they think it is.
No,
That's
no.
right.
Well, John, not only do we appreciate you joining us tonight, but appreciate what you're doing, and a lot of us are, like I say, we're kind of riding in your wake in some ways, and so we appreciate what you're doing, and loved having a chance to talk to you about it.
It was so great to be with you guys, and thanks for what you're doing out there. We're all kind of doing the same work, and it's the same kind of odd congregation that we're a part of. So really, really great to be with you tonight.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
appreciate
thank you
it.
so much.
All right, be well.
Good stuff. You want to send us out, Jeremy?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for hanging out with us tonight. We're super grateful for John joining us. And if you could, on your way out, leave a 5-star review, write a review and tell people why they should be listening to Evangelicalish. Make sure to let people know why they should come to hell with us. It's a beautiful place filled with beautiful people. Last but never least, come join the Ish community. You can be an end of days villain with us. It's so good. And we hang out once every 6 or 8 weeks, and we love connecting with you in those spaces. So go join the beast level or join the Antichrist level, and you too can come join us in hell on earth.
At
on November
evangelicalish.com.
22nd. Yes, evangelicalish.com, aka hell. All right.
Heaven.
Well, we know what it is.
Depends
but
on who.
If we
who
keep
we're
telling them,
talking
hey,
to.
but if we keep telling them it's hell, they won't want to come.
That's true.
Those people. All right. Anyway. All right. For April and Paul, I'm Jeremy. Thanks so much for listening. We love y'all. See you next week.